Welcome back to another review of some candles sent in by one of you subscribers here on the channel. And this review is of candles sent in by Desired Essentials. I'm excited to get started and dig into this box just like I am with each one of these reviews. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this as well. Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here at this channel, we talk a lot about making and selling candles. If any of that interests you, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here as part of the community. And if this is the first time you've ever been to one of these review videos, then let me tell you a little bit real briefly how it works. I do the unboxing here first as part of this video, and we will just take a look at a little bit of the packaging, the presentation, talk about the labeling, the jar. I'll even make some guesses on the wax being used if we're not sure what it is. We'll talk about the wicks, the cold throw, really just everything that we can by just looking at the products themselves. I will also be testing these candles, and then right here within the same video, I'll let you know how that testing went, and then hopefully have some feedback to offer you as well that may or may not be helpful. That is up to you. But I'm excited to do these reviews as always. I really do enjoy working with all of you to improve all of our candles across the board. So thanks again for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. Well, first we open the box up here, and I gotta tell you, it's packed like perfectly. Even the packing material inside is just kind of this nice cube. There's no moving around in here at all. And you'll see some packing peanuts in here, but of course we got the crinkle paper. And on top we've got a business card and a thank you card as well with some candle care tips on the other side. Love the black and white. I use a lot of that in my own branding, so definitely not gonna argue with your color scheme. Almost crinkled that up with the paper. Hi Wade, thank you so much for reviewing the candles. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. Desiree, and she does tell us the wax here is IGI 6006. I'm super familiar with that wax, so hopefully I can offer a little bit of help and insight as we go. And the jar being used is a 9-ounce straight-sided jar. I'm also familiar with that jar. So this is gonna be fun because I should be pretty familiar with this type of combination of materials being used. I don't know the wick yet, and I don't know the fragrance oils, so we'll see how that goes. But the last several reviews I've done have been a lot of materials I haven't really used a ton yet, but I am excited to go back to, let's say, my roots a little bit here, a product that I'm pretty familiar with. All right, let's go ahead and pull out our products here. So I've got the two products here, and you'll notice something right away. It has some reflective bubble wrap around it, and there's really two reasons to use this bubble wrap. The first would be the obvious, and that is just extra cushioning and packing. I will say in that box, the top layer and the bottom layer in that box were well packed on the top and the bottom. Plenty of packing peanuts, definitely no issues there. The side is a little close. These are 4-inch jars roughly by the time you finish them up, and they take up almost the width of that box. It looks like about a 6x6, an 8x8x8 box, and they were pretty close to the side walls. Not a whole lot of room to put in some packing peanuts. So instead, some of this extra bubble wrap should help. And I think it really is probably plenty. So I'm not too concerned. I'm not too concerned with the protection of these candles in that box. So I think a great job there. The other reason that you would use this reflective bubble wrap is it can help a little bit in shipping in extreme weather climates. So super cold and super hot, these can kind of insulate the jars a little bit. Now for that to work, the entire thing would need to be insulated though. So this would have to be wrapped, the whole jar would need to be wrapped in it. Otherwise air will still get in and it's not gonna do you any good as far as temperature and climate control goes. It will help with the protection around the side of the jar, but if you are using this to try to hold off some of that heat from getting in during summer shipping, you'll wanna wrap your entire jar in this, not just the sides like this. I use a lot of this during summer shipping. If any of you bought some of my candles in the past, 4 months maybe, you may have seen me, my products show up wrapped in that for that very reason. Okay, so let's go ahead and open these up. All right, so a very simple, classic look here. We've got clear jars, non-colored wax, black lids, and then a black and white label. Okay, so the one we're starting with is called Good Vibes Soy Blend Candle. And again, this is IGI 6006 wax, which is a parasoy wax if you're not familiar with it. And it is very common to be used and called a soy blend on the label. Really, almost any wax that has a soy in it at all, people often use soy blend or something like that, parasoy or soy blend. High quality, almost vinyl type label here. And then I really like the font on these labels as well. I think it goes really good with the name of your company, as well as I like the fragrance itself, the name of the candle being in that same script. So I think that looks really good. You mentioned that this is a net weight of 7 ounces, which I know is accurate for this size jar. And then it looks like you have a standard warning label here on the bottom. Looks like the warning labels that Candle Science sells, for example, although you could probably get them anywhere, but I've just seen a lot of these. So I think that's probably where that is from. Now, as far as the jar goes, this is a 9-ounce straight-sided jar. Probably looks like a twist top instead of a threaded top. And there is a big difference on that because only certain lids will only work with certain jars. And so make sure anytime you're buying these straight-sided jars or mason jars that you know if it's a threaded or a twist top rim. And it looks like in this case it's a twist top because I'm super familiar with these lids as well. And so these are probably the 7400 twist lids. All right, so for some feedback on the label. This is all personal preference because you have everything you really need as far as a label. And a lot of this information isn't required to be on the label itself as long as it's somewhere on the product packaging. But you've done a great job with putting the important information on the label. But as far as the look of the label, that's going to be personal preference. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of using a white label on white or natural looking candles just because they almost kind of blend together and sometimes there's not enough contrast going on. In your case, I think you can definitely get away with it because you have the black lid, which also accents the black words on your label. So I think that does add some contrast and some appeal. And like I said, it's a very sophisticated, simple look. So I think that there's nothing wrong with that. For me, I like to use either black and white labels on colored candles or on a non-colored candle. I like to add a little splash of color on my labels. The other thing you can do is just fill the white space a little bit more. I actually like some white space. I think it looks nice and clean, but if you wanted, you could break some of the label up by just adding a few lines or something like that just to kind of fill some of that white space. But those are just options depending on your own personal preference. It's totally up to you. Everyone's going to have a different idea on labels and what kind of label designs they like. In fact, I'm always messing with labels because I'm never happy and I'm always kind of tweaking and coming up with new collections with new labels and so on. Let's go ahead and open this one up. All right, I feel like I've smelled this one before. What is that? Is there some kind of mint in there? This is interesting. I feel like I know what it is and it's right on the tip of my tongue, but I can't put my finger on it. Whatever it is, the name is actually perfect. I think that's a great name for the fragrance. It's hard to explain fragrances through a camera. It seems familiar. There's almost something kind of spicy about it too. I'm not sure what it is though. I don't know if we're gonna find out what it is, but I really like it. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the wax. Well, let me mention a couple things. Let me go back a little bit. 6006 does have some issues with, you got to find the right pour temperature for your environment. You can get some sinkholes, you got to fill them in. It can take a little work. It's a great hot throw wax. It throws great for the most part. I know some people have some bad experiences with 6006 like you would any wax, but it does take some getting used to. This wax can be tricky at first, but the one thing that I do tend to like about it, and again, this is kind of a preference thing, but a lot of people always worry about the jar adhesion and wet spots, and you get the uneven, adhesion to the side of the jars. And so sometimes people are looking to fill the entire jar perfectly wall to wall like a 464 soy wax would. But with certain waxes, they don't want to do that. They shrink a little bit more as they cool. And trying to fight that and trying to force it to stick to the walls, you're going to drive yourself nuts. So one thing I like about 6006 is if you find that right pour temperature, it will shrink enough around the entire jar that you don't have any wet spots because all of the wax actually contracted together uniformly and it looks great. So you don't even see wet spots on this. It's just the whole jar. It's really hard to see in the camera, but the whole jar looks good. And that's because none of it is flush up against the wall. It all pulled away just a little bit. And that's a really nice thing about some waxes. Now, as far as the wick being used, I would bet anything that this is a Premier wick. As far as the size, I'd probably have to say a Premier 750 if I just had to throw something out there. There are a lot of sizes of Premier 700 series wicks. They increment by 5. So there's like 725, 730s, 35, 40s, and so on. Just some experience with 6006 and jars like this, you can use wicks anywhere from 735 all the way up to 760, or even more. So I would just say probably 750, 745, somewhere in there. One thing I'll mention is this one is cut a little short. This one's cut just a tiny bit short. I don't know if the camera will pick it up. It's more like an 1/8 inch rather than a 1/4 inch. I don't know if you'll be able to see it in camera. So hopefully it lights and burns okay. We will find out. If it doesn't, no problem. There's little tricks you can do. Wouldn't worry about it too much, but just something I noticed. All right, let's go ahead and check out this next candle. This one is called Misty Nights. I'm trying to think of what that could smell like. I'm imagining something maybe cool and crisp, but I don't know. We'll find out. All right, one thing I've noticed is just picking this up, the lid is it doesn't lock. You notice that it just spins around. It never actually locks. A couple things that could be. First of all, you can just have a bad lid that's just not threaded very well. I've had that happen before, and you just got to use a new lid if you ever notice that. I've also had jars that have some kind of threading issue and no lid fit on that. And so you just had to ditch that jar. But the reason I bring it up is make sure, you might want to make sure that when you order jars, I'm assuming these are from the same supply, the same box, the same lot of jars that you bought from your supplier. But if they're not, always make sure that you're getting the exact same jar, especially if it's from a different supplier, because some of them look the same, they're called the same, but they have a slightly different threading at the top, and you might not have lids that fit like you expect, and then you're going to be stressed out because you don't have any lids that'll work. I don't think that's the case on this one. It's possible that it's from a slightly different batch of jars. I'm trying to line them up here and see. You know what? They actually do seem a little bit different. They actually are different jars. Yeah, looking at these closely, camera won't show it, but I can tell from the bottom that these are different jars. So whatever the jar is on your Misty Nights, you might want to double check, Desiree, and make sure that your lids are actually fitting those jars. Because like your standard 9-ounce straight-sided jar, and then like the Flint jar from Aztec Candle Company, they look the same, they're the same size and everything, but the lids don't fit each other. It's not a super big deal in this case because it still fits and it stays on. It just doesn't actually tighten all the way around. So I just want you to know, in case you're not aware, that you may have two different jars going on here. So anyways, let's move on. Misty Nights, here we go. Oh my God, I've smelled that scent before. Man, what is that? Huh, okay. Well, this one reminds me of an ex-girlfriend. I don't remember which one, but, oh, that sounded horrible. Don't judge me. It kind of reminds me a little bit of a perfume that one of them wore, and it's got like a tiny bit of fruitiness or something in it, something sweet. It's actually pretty good. I don't want to like it because it smells like an ex-girlfriend, but I kind of do. I wish I knew what the fragrances were. I wish I had the name of them so I could let you guys know and probably more properly describe it, because I'm not always the best with words when it comes to explaining the fragrances. This one is definitely trimmed to a better length, but also more importantly, it's a different wick. This one is using a zinc core wick. If you guys have never used zinc core wicks, you're not familiar with them. They are still cotton wicks. It's just in the middle, instead of a paper core or a cotton core, in the middle there is a tiny little zinc wire. It's not lead, it's totally safe, there's nothing wrong with them. Zinc wicks may actually still be the #1 used wick in the United States. I don't know, it has been forever. Maybe it's not anymore, but it is a very common wick. There are pros and cons to it, just like there are any kind of wick. The pros is that it's the easiest wick in the world to work with. It never curls, it never leans, it stays dead centered, it's rigid. It's so easy. I mean, that's one of the reasons it's so popular, is they are fantastic and they're very consistent burning wicks. Perfect burn pool in the center every single time. The drawback to them is they can mushroom a little bit more because they have that metal core, the zinc core. Again, it's not lead, it's just zinc, but that can cause it to mushroom a little bit more if not wicked. Even if wicked properly, it can still mushroom a little bit, but that's kind of a preference thing. If it's wicked properly and everyone's trimming their candles the right way, then it's never an issue. In fact, I use zinc core wicks with my 6006 for the first couple years. I even used it. And then the only other sort of drawback, it's really not, but perceptually maybe, is some customers don't know that it's a zinc core wick. They don't know what they're seeing. And I've had some ask before, why it's got a metal in the wick. If they've never seen it before, it might draw some questions, but it's not really a bad thing. All right, so now I want to say one other thing here before we move on, before I forget, and that is about the cold throw. 6006, like every wax, has pros and cons. This is one of the ones that I would say is sort of a con to 6006. It has below average cold throw in my opinion, maybe average at best depending on the fragrance oil, but it's a little below average. It doesn't have as strong of a cold throw as some of your softer waxes or some of your softer soy waxes in particular, but that is offset with having an above average hot throw. And the reason for that is that paraffin content in it gives it a little kick of hot throw, but because this isn't as soft as something like a 464 or a coconut soy wax, softer waxes give better cold throw generally. I mean, that's a generalization, but for the most part, softer waxes give a better cold throw. And then this wax in particular has a good hot throw. That's one of its strong points. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah, that's definitely an ex-girlfriend. Now, some of you may be asking, why 2 different wicks in each one of these jars, even though it's the same size jar and the same wax? Well, I actually do that too. I like to test a few different wicks that I know work well or can work within my combination of materials in my jars and with my wax. And when I make test candles, I will use 1 or 2 sizes of each of those wicks that I know work well. If you haven't seen my testing process video, I'll try to remember to add a link above and also in the description, but you'll find it on my channel. Just search testing in the videos. I do that as well, and a lot of times I find that a different wick size not only is more appropriate for a certain fragrance oil, but sometimes even a different wick type. For example, when I use 6006, I actually use 3 different wick types very commonly through all of my 6006 candles. I used Premier 700 wicks, HTP wicks, and zinc wicks. When I make candles with Provolone 464, for example, I've used CDN wicks, I've used Premier wicks, and I've used HTP wicks. So even that one, again, I use 3. Some waxes really work with a lot of different wicks. But another benefit of using different wicks is when you have supplier or sourcing issues, like all of this year and all of last year with the pandemic, it's been hard to get materials. And if you have other wicks that you know work well with your combination, you can have backups, which is awesome. So every time I test, I find my A wick, my top rated wick, and then I find my B wick, which is my backup wick. So think of it as awesome and backup, whatever. But anyways, I think it's a good strategy, even if you end up using most of the same wick across the board in all your candles, which is obviously more convenient, but you have a backup plan in case you have a hard time getting those wicks. So a little bit of an extra pro tip there. So I'm not shocked at all to see 2 different wicks here, but some of you that haven't seen them before may have wondered why. All right, so I'm gonna do some testing. You're not gonna know that I've been gone at all because here in just a minute, I'm gonna talk about those results, but I am gonna do some testing over the next several days, let you know how that testing went. We'll talk about the hot throw, we'll talk about the wicking, the overall performance. 6006 can be very tricky sometimes to wick properly, so I'm excited. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about. All right, stay tuned, I'll be right back. All right, testing's in the books. 6006, how did everything go? Well, let's first of all talk about the hot throw. Both hot throws on each of these candles was excellent. That is usually the case with a wax like 6006, but I know that some people struggle with the hot throw, even with that wax. In this case, though, it was not an issue at all. Just like with every wax, you do want to find fragrance oils that are compatible. I would say the majority seem to work pretty well with 6006, at least in my experience. It also comes down to proper wicking. Overwicked and underwicked both will diminish your hot throw. And of course, like every other candle, the size of the jar, the width of that melt pool will definitely contribute to good hot throw. And of course, with fragrance oils, some are stronger than others and some are weaker. But all that being said, in this particular case, both Good Vibes and Misty Nights candles had great hot throw. I would say that the Good Vibes candle definitely had a better hot throw, at least in my experience, at least where I was burning the candles. But it was close all around, both had good hot throw. But the number one thing we all care about when it comes to testing our candles is about the performance and the wick testing. How did they burn? Well, let's start off with Good Vibes. That was the one that I believe was a Premier wick. It could have been an LX wick as well. Premiers and LX wicks look very similar when they're in the wax. But if I had to guess, I'd probably go with the Premier 700 series wicks, mostly because it had about a 30 to 45 degree curl on it. And I'm familiar with those wicks and this wax. And so it seemed like a Premier 700 wick to me. As far as the sizing though, I said it could have been anywhere between a 735 or 740, all the way up to like a 765. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle, 745, 750, something like that. And I would say all around, it was a really, really good wicked candle. I'm gonna show some of the footage here. Just a heads up on the footage. I don't have a ton to show on this one because every burn was pretty much the exact same. I'll show you a couple different burns here. One at the kind of couple hour mark and another one 4 hours later and maybe even on an additional burn. But they really did the same thing through the entirety of the candle. This is also the candle that had the wick trimmed very, very low before the first light. That was around 1/8 of an inch. It was very short. That first burn had a little bit of difficulty because that flame was awfully small at the very beginning, but it ended up being fine. So no worries there at all. I'd still probably try to trim it basically to 1/4 inch for consistency, but it ended up burning fine. After the second or third burn, everything was good. Now, it did develop a little bit of a mushroom, a little bit of a carbon cap on it. That's pretty common with a lot of waxes. It's pretty common with the 6006, especially if the fragrance load is relatively high. I'm assuming this is around 9% or so. but it never became an issue. I actually think this is a pretty good wicked candle. From pretty much start to finish, it performed very well. You might be able to go down one size and see if it still works for you, because in my opinion, the smallest size that works well is usually the best option. I know that sounds like common sense, but there's a lot of wicks that will perform pretty well and give you a decent melt pool and good hot throw, but if you can find the smallest one of those wicks that achieves that goal, I think that you're on the right track. So it was a good wicked candle, but if you can get away with one size smaller, give it a shot. Let's move on to the Misty Nights. That was the one with the zinc core wick. Now I did not talk about this, about the size of that wick in the first part of the video. If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably around a 44, 36, or even a 51 size zinc core wick. Those are just kind of guesses there, but this one in this particular case was definitely overwicked in my opinion. It burned fine, had good hot throw, and as notable with all zinc core wicks, the melt pool was perfect. Dead center flame, even melt pool. I mean, that's the great benefit of zinc core wicks, is the wick stays perfect and is a completely straight burn profile the entire time. But I did also mention they are prone to some extra mushrooming, a little bit more than other wicks. In this case though, I think you could cut down the mushroom a little bit if you just lowered the size just a tad. For example, if this was a size 51 wick, I would probably go down to maybe a 44-28, something like that. If this is a 44-36, I would go down to a 44-24, 44-28. I guess long story short, I'm not sure what size wick you used here for your zinc core, but I would try a 44-24 or a 44-28 18 wick and see if that gives you any success. I don't know what size wicks you've got to work with or what you've got your availability, but if it was me, those are the wicks, the sizes I would probably try if it were me. It did burn good. Everything about it was good, except it was just a little oversized. You could lower it one wick size, maybe two, and see if you can still get good results otherwise. Then I would definitely suggest at least trying that. But the other good thing about a zinc core wick is even if you are a little oversized and you do develop a mushroom and you do get kind of a large flame, at least with a zinc core wick, it stays centered and never leans towards one side of the glass, because that's when you can really get into trouble. If the glass gets too hot on one side, it could crack or it could shatter. With a zinc core wick, it stays perfectly centered. So you might get kind of a big ball of carbon on the top, but at least it's staying in the middle and pointed up and not towards the glass. But all in all, I really enjoyed these candles. I like working with 6006 because it can be a challenge to work with, but when you nail it, it's such a good wax and it's such a good performer, but it can be tricky. So all of you using 6006, I've got some other videos on the channel that might give you some pointers, but just know to be patient with that wax. It can take some time to getting used to. If you're coming from something like 464 or coconut soy wax, it's totally different wax. So you got to be patient with it. You got to do a lot of ample testing. All the waxes have pros and cons, so you just got to find out what's most important to you. Thank you very much for sending them in. Again, these were from Desired Essentials. If anyone else is interested in sending in any candles for review and some feedback here on the channel, remember, it does not have to be a finished product. I am willing to test and give you feedback on works in progress or finished products. It's totally up to you. There's really no rules to this, so just let me know in the comments if you're interested. Also in the comment section, if you use 6006, let us know what your favorite wicks type to use is, and if you don't use 6006, what is your favorite wax to use and why? All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Stay tuned for other videos here on the channel. Hopefully a couple pop up here. If not, just go to the channel, the video section, and you can see everything we've got so far. If you're not a subscriber, don't forget to subscribe. We've got a lot more coming. I appreciate you all for being here, and I'll see you next time.